to move. We are standing.
Boom, and just like that, we're back. And look who appeared on set, Luzette from Love is Everywhere. I want to first say hello to our friends in the Philippines who are joining us. I'll be there shortly. I'm very excited to get there. And you've been so gracious as to introduce us to your family.
Yes.
And with the project that we're doing. But this segment is not about me. It's about you. It's about your walk with the Lord. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing your testimony with us. So just kind of a basic thing of, and you can start wherever you want. I know in my life, the way that I was raised was very different. I was raised Catholic and Jewish. And so I was curious. I had a lot of questions as a kid. No one could answer them. And so it took 33 years of mistakes. And that was the point where God's like, this one's now ready. And that's when he woke me up and my life started to change. And the way that I look at my belief is that your testimony is an ongoing process.
Yes.
It's not something where it just stops because we're on a walk with the Lord, not a standstill.
Right.
And so wherever you'd like to start, where in your life did you start to see a change?
Well, I would say just very recently,
Okay.
but I was raised a Catholic, so.
Okay.
In the Philippines, everybody is Catholic. And hello, by the way, I talked to my sister last night and we were talking about you and your projects and all
Okay.
that. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, I called too to let her know you're on. So let's see. I hope you're watching.
I think
everyone.
they will be. So the way that you were raised in Catholicism,
Yes.
you're raised a certain way. So go on from there.
So my mother was a very devoted Catholic, and she is the prayer leader in our community. So whenever there's a time for prayer, like birthdays, weddings, and such, where somebody died, people in our community pray. She'll be called to lead the prayer. She's a prayer leader.
Okay.
And as long as I remember, whenever I wake up in the morning, she's on her knees praying. And when I go to bed at night, she's on her knees praying. That's how devoted she is. And I remember she used to tell me that she really needs to pray hard because she feels responsible for my family, you know. And that's how I was raised. Okay. So during Christmas season, the 16 days before the Christmas day, we used to go to church early in the morning.
Wow.
That was fun. That was fun growing up with her.
Okay.
And on Sundays, we would go to church, and I would get special treats after the church.
That's great.
Yes,
I think a lot of people can relate to that. They're like, oh, that's what I did during childhood too.
Yes, and when I went to college, things changed because I was on my own and I was a little curious now. So I tried all the other religions. I tried the Baptists, I tried the Christian, these born-again Christians, and everything else that I can do, Hinduism. And in fact, I studied world religions in college too, so some experiment. And so I got older. I tried to walk the walk and be with God, but I had to go through a lot. People say history repeats itself, and that's true until you learn that lesson that was supposed to be in that situation. And I am very stubborn. I'm a Capricorn, so I'm really stubborn. So I learned everything the hard way. So things have been going on, and I'm still not hearing God's message. I don't know, somehow, because I wasn't ready. But this last year, remember I talked to you about on my show how things changed. I was with this group. Okay. Well, I went to try the Christian way of religion, and I came back to Catholicism because I wanted that standard, that
The structure.
structure. Yeah, I wanted that structure. So I came back, and I became a part of this group, Samahan ng Mahal na Birhen Maria. I was one of the pillars. I was chosen as the one to read the scriptures on Sundays and interpret it. So I tried to, interpret it like love. Because when Jesus came, he summarized the 10 Commandments into 2.
Yes.
Love your God and love your neighbor as yourself. So that's what my basis and what I was talking about based on the Bible too. But these people, they're still doing the human thing.
Yes.
So and then this thing happened with my apartment. I had to leave, and when I needed help, nobody was there to help me. Only one person. And this happened too when I got divorced in Dallas. I was going through a divorce. I thought I had a lot of friends. I did not have any. I had one friend who supported me. So that's why I left Dallas too. So this happened again. But this time I really heard his voice. I learned that I must trust him 100%. And being a single mom, I had a lot of worries, financially, everything. And I've been praying and praying and praying, but it's still I'm still going through challenges. And then it came to me, I learned it from the scriptures that until you trust him 100%, meaning no more worries because he takes care of everything, that's when things started to happen. So I trusted him that God take care of everything. I put everything into your hands. Please now use me in your work. So it started.
That's beautiful.
Yes, and I changed the people that I surrounded myself with, and so I started hanging out with Toastmasters, and my life changed because Toastmasters. I just want to say this again. Toastmasters is the most positive, most loving, and most supportive environment you could ever be in. So that's, in fact, Toastmasters is the one that catapulted me to where I am now with all these shows and
that's good.
God's word.
Yes, it's precise.
So now things changed. I stopped going to church for a whole year. I did not step in a church, not any kind of church, Catholic, Christian, or whatever. So I just read the Bible and got into myself, and that's the start of the beginning. Start of the beginning.
No, it's good. I'll address some stuff as we're going.
Yes, and then this is God's time now. So I offered my life to God, and now as an insurance agent, you are supposed to have your calendar for the whole week or even for the whole month before the week starts. But nowadays, I let God plan my days.
And this throws people. There's a few. You made great points. Number one, I find that God's children hear His voice. Right? They hear His voice. We're very curious by nature, which a lot of our stories are very similar. We started seeking. Didn't know what we were seeking. Well, we were seeking truth. And so people often ask, I know a person and they're being brought up this way. Can Jesus still get to them? Yes, Jesus will get to everyone. He's not going to lose anyone that our Father promised him. And so no matter how a person's raised, and even having a similar background of being raised in Catholicism, is that you reach a point and you start questioning things. Now here's the other thing. The world paints a picture of Christianity. All Christianity means is Christ-like. See, I throw that out the window when people are sitting there and they're compartmentalizing religion. Jesus wasn't here saying, follow this religion. He was saying, follow me.
Yes.
And what ends up happening is, how can there be all these different doctrinal issues and denominations if there's one word? That's interesting. See, as man, we start to come in there and interject and put our 2 cents in. We don't need to do that. God's an expert on His word. We are not. And so as we're seeking things, we often find the hypocrisy of man teaching. And even with that story that I started the show with today, with the Pharisees, the healing didn't pertain to what they thought it should be, meaning it was outside of the box of what they had compartmentalized God in.
Right.
And because of that reason, they couldn't recognize it. Now, how often do people do this now? You've heard this all the time. You can't be saved unless you do this, that, or the...
Yes,
that's not true. Correct.
Yep.
The conditions are, Jesus called you and goes, wake up. Now, sometimes man gets upset. Why? Because they lose control. Well, guess what? You don't have control of God's Spirit. And when it's time, it's like how can I compare this to? It's like a refiner's fire. And it's pottery.
That's how I compare.
Right? And we have impurities.
Yes.
And we're put in, and the fire's turned up, and the impurities start to melt off. Some are a little harder. And so we're stubborn. We tend to get a little more lump. So it's like, all right, the fire needs to go up a little bit. And then you start to see, well, wait a minute, now I'm trusting Him. Because again, if everything was showed to us at once, it would be overwhelming. We really would have heart attacks.
Yes.
But so little by little, we're learning to trust Him.
Yes.
We're shown stuff. He gives us just enough time to get things right so we can start to see, number one, of where we are coming from. We can recognize darkness versus light, and then we can learn to trust Him. And it's funny, I agree with you because our stories are similar. And, before when I was a heathen, for 20 years, didn't believe in anything, doing everything, broke all the commandments, just all of them, multiple times. And I like to share this not because I'm bragging, it's to show people it doesn't matter what you've done. You've got to throw that in the garbage when and I've heard people say, well, I went to this church and they said because I had done this, I couldn't be saved. And I go,
Right.
Lord, have mercy on their souls. Because again, God knows your heart. And if you're seeking him, nothing's going to get in the way. And oftentimes what happens is when it's time, that's when Jesus comes. As people that are carrying that message, we're simply sowing seeds. We can share our testimony. We can defer people to the word to tell them to read it. But at the end of the day, when Jesus goes, now it's time, he's going to open their eyes. And there's not a thing that's going to get in the way, no matter what man thinks.
Yeah.
But it's funny because you reach that point after studying and doing all this stuff and then thinking and then that aha moment starts to happen. And you see that all of this stuff you've been taught was wrong.
Yes.
And so for that year and a half, once he woke me up, which was in 2015, I didn't go to church either.
Oh.
I don't consider myself a church person. And so for a year and a half, he taught me the word. So as you start to read it, what happens? You're seeking your Father.
Yes.
And he starts to show stuff to you. You're like, wait a minute. Because too often a person's like, you have to go to church. Church is great. It's a gathering of believers. It has nothing to do with a building because you're the temple of God.
Church is your heart.
Yes. And so what ends up happening is then you start to say, okay, now show me where I'm supposed to be. And he starts bringing other believers like a harvest together to fellowship.
That's like what we're doing now.
It's so strange because we're not controlling it, but we start to see that there's certain people that we're comfortable around, and like now it starts to make sense. So I always leery of people. I tell them, I go, don't let man dictate salvation. That's the first mistake because that's what we were raised into, was telling of how it's supposed to go. But man doesn't control it. They never have, and that's what makes them nervous.
That's right.
So continue on. Once your walk started, once he came, and I know you're currently in it, what was that first kind of aha moment like? When you started seeing something, you go, wait a minute, now stuff's starting to make a little more sense.
Well, when it first happened, I didn't go to church, right? So because and then the light turned on. When Jesus was here on earth, he did not say to come to church with him. He said just to follow him. And so this church and this whatever we believe in, what this church is, it's all made by man to control. I'm not trying to go against anyone out there. This is just my personal opinion that man wants to control.
Yes.
Yes. And even this time, in the beginning, they don't have watches. They did not say that you're supposed to be do this at this particular time. Not what do you call this? No restraints. We have boundaries, but so whenever I started walking the walk in God, it just showed, and I want to practice what I preach. So I'm always I make it a point when I wake up. When I go through my day, to talk to someone, smile at them, say hello, and spend time with them. I would really love to do that with my daughter. That would be really nice because charity begins at home, they say, but it's a challenge. But I know that she's coming around. I've been praying a lot for her, and And so the people around me has noticed, whatever it is that you're doing, it's working. Look at you. What changed? They tell me. Well, I'm just happy.
Yeah.
You
It's
know?
a pouring out of the world. What ends up happening, and you made a good point, is that Jesus did go and he did preach in the temples. The majority of the time he was out where? He was outside of those four walls helping sinners. Because every time he was having dinner, having this, doing that, people are like, why are you eating with sinners? Why are you doing this? And he stated very clearly, it's the sick who need a doctor, not the ones who think they're healthy. And that's the thing, is that plenty of people think they're healthy and they're sick, and they don't understand it because they think they're walking the right way. The teachers did back then, they couldn't see God. That's amazing to me. So when a person, and I find that same thing's happening yet again, is the ones who realize how much we messed up. We're seeing the Lord, and we're like, no, it's not what you think. It's not what they're teaching. Come out of the world and start, having a relationship with God. Oftentimes when I've talked to people, people that were even brought up in the church, that were raised Christian, it didn't matter because there was a point they reached when they go, I knew of Christ, but I had no relationship.
Yes.
It's like knowing about someone. Lucifer knows about him. He's not following him. These are the differences. Just because you can identify something, that's not a relationship. When you start to have a personal relationship, no one can change that. You stop
Yes.
wavering because little by little your faith gets stronger. You're pouring out more and more of the world, and more of the Spirit is getting poured into you.
Right.
And then you're saying, something's different now, and then people can see what? They can see the light of Christ in you.
Right.
It's not even what you say. People are like, well, it's what you say. No, it's not. What about a person that can't talk? It's the actions, because you become a
Yes.
representative of the kingdom, not a representative
right.
of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing where what ends up happening is you are walking what you're saying. And then people see it. Because most of the people that are in your life are watching. They never hear a word you're saying, but they see when they go, something's
yes,
changing.
yes, yes.
And you'll hear one day, they're like, I've seen the change in you. And you're like, where did you come from? Because you're always being watched, and you start seeing that we are a representative of the kingdom. Mm-hmm. And that's when you're taking it seriously, and you go, wow, I understand the sacrifice that Christ made. When it really, you turn from sin. You no longer want to. It doesn't mean we don't make mistakes. People misconstrue, you're perfect. I'm not perfect, God's perfect. But what ends up happening is the way that we used to live shifts.
Uh-huh.
We don't want to mess up anymore. Before we didn't care, do whatever we want.
Yes.
But now it's like, I don't want to do this anymore. Mm-hmm. And so that's a valid point, is that most people will say, well, you have to go to this place, you have to go to this place. And you're like, no, I'm just doing what I'm led to do by the Spirit. And the fact that people are now recognizing
God's permission to move